Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining me on our Take Two recital weekend. And thank you to Rhonda and Robin for hosting this performance in Hampton and for all the practice sessions as well that they've generously opened their doors for. Because, of course, today I'm performing on a piano with a DS 5.5 inch octave keyboard, which from a practical viewpoint means that my regular octave handspan and maybe a very stretched out ninth can now get a very stretched out 10th, which means that more things are possible. The repertoire that I'm performing, I do not normally perform on a regular size keyboard, but there are notes that I would leave out that I am putting back in today, which is exciting to explore, and different fingering solutions that are now possible as well. But the biggest difference that I notice is the power that I can achieve performing on this piano, because everything I do is so much more relaxed. And I know as a child, I'd perform in local Eisteddfods and run back to my seat in the audience next to Mum and say, "Was it okay?" She'd go, "Yes, it was lovely, darling. But you were a bit soft." And then the first time I performed here to practice, Rhonda's husband, Robin, commented, "By golly goodness, it was loud in a good way." So for me, that's the big difference in performing on a keyboard of this size for my hands. The program was inspired during COVID by the SBS World News tagline, "News from home if you live in the world," which I always thought was beautiful, that we were also connected. But then in COVID, we had that physical disconnect. But at the same time, it really opened up the possibilities for online communication. And in some ways, I felt more connected to people around the country and friends around the world than I had before, because it was acceptable to communicate and socialise in that way. So I think in this program, music represents that connection. These composers are all linked by the universal language that they share and the way that they've used cultural music and folk elements from their home countries in their music, and how that has sort of bled into a mismatch, well, not a mismatch, it works very well, the wrong word, but bled into an amalgamation of different music and styles and different cultural meanings. So we start our program in the Soviet Union. Aram Khachaturian, composer who was head of the Union of Soviet Composers for a while, and one of his earliest works, the Toccata, composed while he was a student at the Moscow Conservatory. In this work, he absolutely uses some of his Armenian folk elements, especially in the middle, very expressive section. But I also like to think that he's slightly inspired by the Industrial Revolution. There's a motoric sense to his use of rhythmic ostinatos that just keeps building and never lets up. So, staying in Russia a little while longer, Sergei Prokofiev, at around the same time that Khachaturian was composing this work, was about to come back to Russia, lured by the commission of writing Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet as a ballet. Of course, at the same time, socialist realism was in some ways restricting how composers could write and what was included in their music. Things had to be representing everyday life and truthful and providing a sort of an aspirational way of living that the working class could aspire to as well. And so Prokofiev, knowing this, decided that he'd make the ending a happy ending. As a result, the ballet got cut, wasn't allowed to be premiered, and it had its first performance in Czechoslovakia instead. A few years later, though, it was performed, and Prokofiev himself has done piano transcriptions of many of the dances. And so this is the dance of the Montagues and the Capulets. So the thread of music moving around the world is brought in here by a Greek composer, Manos Hadjidakis, of the fame Never on a Sunday and the music for Nana Mouskouri. And so Hadjidakis has taken a theme that I think you'll recognise and added it to his collection of piano works for a Little White Seashell. And this is his conversation with Sergei Prokofiev. Just a little taster to transport us over to Europe. And now the next little bracket, which I won't interrupt with speaking about each piece individually because I feel that I'm talking constantly, is a bracket by the Spanish composer Enrique Granados, who, of course, was famous for bringing the Spanish national music and embedding it with styles similar to his idols of Chopin and Liszt. The first work, probably one of his most famous, is The Maiden and the Nightingale from his suite, Opus 11, Goyescas. These works were inspired by the paintings of Goya. Whilst they're not attached to a particular painting themselves, they do have stories linked in the Machismo movement. And this one in particular appears to tell the story of a young woman, Rosaria, who is in love with Fernando, captain of the guard, and he likewise is in love with her. However, at a dance, Paquiro, one of the servants, flirts with Rosaria, and whilst she denies his advances, Fernando sees this as a challenge and sets to amend things, put things right. He challenges Paquiro to a duel. Of course, Rosaria thinks, well, I've got two men after me now, but soon there might be none. What am I going to do? And she sings her song of remorse and complaint to a nightingale, which you'll hear at the end of the piece. Following this, two of Granados' Spanish dances, all based on traditional dances, number 8 and number 12, although in the reverse order today, because number 8 is much more of an exciting finish. So hopefully that piece made you feel as if you were drifting across on the ocean, because we're connecting some different continents here. Of course, that was Debussy's Reverie, which was one of his earliest piano compositions and not actually published until quite some time after its composition, because Debussy thought it was the work of a child composer at the time and wasn't very proud of it. I personally think it's beautiful and deserves to be up there in his canon just as much as anything else. But where it's leading us to, via its European roots, is over to Argentina and the composer Alberto Ginastera, who was born in Buenos Aires but to an Italian mother and Catalan father. And for a while, he connected to those roots and preferred to pronounce his name with the soft G, Ginastera, instead. But his music is absolutely infused with Argentinian folk melodies and elements, and can be broken into three different periods. The objective nationalism, where these folk elements are right there up in your face in the music. The subjective nationalist period, where they're more interwoven with some of the more contemporary compositional and formalist ideas of the time period. And then his third period, which is much more avant-garde and experimental. So this work from the objective nationalist period, the second of three Argentinian dances, the dance of the beautiful maiden, where you should hear her swirling amongst the pampas grass of the Argentine grasslands. So same side of the world, moving north into the Californian hills. This is a piece by contemporary composer Martin Bresnik, who's head of composition at Yale and married to a very wonderful Australian expat pianist, Lisa Moore, who frequently comes to Melbourne and performs and has mentored me. This work is based on the true story of a man named Ishi, who was the last surviving member of the Yahi tribe of native Indians. They were living in the hills in Northern California and eventually forced out due to lack of food and resources. Ishi, the last man standing, was found by some anthropologists at UCLA and taken in, provided with accommodation, and was looked after in exchange for knowledge about his culture and his language. At the time, Ishi wasn't able to introduce himself because a custom of the Yahi people was that an elder of the tribe had to speak your name for you first before you could use your own name in conversation with strangers. Because he was the last man, he's been given the name Ishi, which literally just means man, not his name. Ishi lived for a number of years at the University of California and hosted many tours of the museum and taught a lot about his culture to the university and people visiting. And in this piece, Martin Bresnik has taken a tune of the Medu Doctor's Song, of which there is a transcription of Ishi singing, and used that as the thread throughout this performance, which gets embellished and layered upon and used in many different ways. So, Ishi's song.
Yanini wakima wakima, yanini wakima.
And the link of contemporary composers brings us back home to finish the program with a work by Soviet-born composer Elena Katz-Chernin. So we've actually come full circle. This work, Butterflying, was originally composed as opening music for the opening of the Rugby World Cup, as it is, in an orchestral version with text by Christopher Latham. The work talks of a child dreaming as they were a butterfly, never landing on the ground and soaring into their dreams. It's been arranged for many different combinations of instruments, including a children's choir, but the piano arrangement is the most famous. So, Butterflying.